Community property trusts, what are they and who are they applicable to? Well, today we're going to unpack this, and I have a special guest with me, Ryan Knight. Ryan owns Knight Legal. He's an estate attorney here in Tennessee and is going to be able to answer what I believe is one of the most exciting opportunities that a lot of individuals are going to have, but it's an exciting opportunity that almost nobody knows anything about, right? Because there are folks out there that know or have heard of community property states. There are actual states that if you live in those, they're considered community property states. There are only a handful or so of those. And so a lot of people just think that this isn't going to apply to them. However, in the state of Tennessee, which is not a community property state, individuals can set up a community property trust. And this trust can have significant advantages to that family. And so, number one, let's talk about taxes. Everyone's concerned with taxes. So, are there ways to eliminate capital gains on highly appreciated assets or capital gains on assets that we own? Is there a way to eliminate the tax on those gains with this community property trust?
Absolutely. And first, I feel like we need to figure out exactly what capital gains are. So for those of you who are not familiar with what capital gains are, it's basically taxes that you will pay on realized appreciation. So if you paid $100,000 for something, or you bought stock, $100,000 worth of stock, and it's now appreciated to $500,000, that gain, there'll be taxes owed. That is capital gains. And as Dan was mentioning, there are trusts in Tennessee now called community property trusts that can really benefit you there. So an example of with your real estate, if you live in this area in Williamson County, you have a home that's likely appreciated quite a bit through the years, especially in the recent past. So let's say you paid $500,000 for that property and it's worth $1 million now. That $500,000 in gain will have taxes owed if you ever sell that. Now, what a community property trust can do for you is if that property is sold and it's jointly owned with the spouse, it can negate or do away with altogether any gain on that property. And we can talk a little bit more of how that's set up.
Yeah, so under the current laws, if someone did not have a community property trust, and let's say there was a rental property they own with this $500,000 of appreciation, and one spouse dies. So what happens to the basis or the tax responsibility for that surviving spouse without community property trust planning?
So traditionally, if you own something as a married couple in Tennessee, you own it what's called tenants by the entirety, which means it's not community property. It's not treated as community property. And so what happens there is when one spouse dies, there's what's called a half step up in tax basis. Now, again, as we mentioned before, your original tax basis in that example would be the $500,000 for your property. Its current value is $1 million. So if one of you passed away, there would be a half step up where the surviving spouse's new tax basis is $750. So essentially the way you calculate that is you take your original tax basis, add it to the current value, and divide by 2, and that's your half step up. So there's still in that example $250,000 in gain. Yes, it's not $500,000, but $250,000 in gain that taxes will be owed on. And so that's where the community property trust really comes in and benefits you.
So with this community property trust, we've talked about real estate for the most part, but what other types of investments or assets would this cover? It's not just real estate.
Yeah, it could be anything. If you have any asset that has realized appreciation and it's jointly owned, a community property trust could benefit you. And obviously there's some scenarios where it could benefit you more than others. I've had clients who've had property that they've paid, there was a farm in Williamson County for a client of mine who they paid about $1.5 million for it. It's worth $13 million now. If they sell that after one spouse dies, there's a lot of tax savings in that. And so, the way a community property trust, and we haven't talked on it, but it essentially, when the first spouse dies, allows the surviving spouse to get a full step up in tax basis. So anything you put in this trust gets a full step up, not a half step up. So in our example earlier, the surviving spouse's new tax basis will be $1 million, not $500 or not $750. And so there'd be no taxes owed if that surviving spouse decided to sell that property.
So if there are any appreciated assets that's owned jointly with this Tennessee Community Property Trust, we can essentially eliminate all of the capital gains tax at the death of one owner for either spouse. So if you think about that, if you have anything out there that's appreciated in value, stocks, mutual funds, real estate, your primary residence, any investment out there that you own jointly, this Tennessee Community Property Trust, just by having it set up, if one of those individuals died, gets a 100% step up, eliminating all of the capital gains tax at the death of that first individual. So, I think that's where I said this is an exciting thing. It is exciting. People need to know more about it. And there are some really, really big upsides, as we just mentioned. I mean, legally, morally, ethically disinheriting the IRS from massive gains is an amazing thing. And it's a law written within the tax code, and you only get to take advantage of it if this is set up in advance of somebody dying. You can't set this up after the fact. So what could be the downside to the Tennessee Community Property Trust, or are there?
Yeah, so the downside is that when someone traditionally owns something as community property, it's 50-50. So anything you put in this trust, if there was ever a divorce, that is going to be 50-50, no questions asked. It's split between each spouse. And so that may matter. It may not. It could have been a jointly owned asset you're putting there anyways. But that is something that is treated different by it being in community property versus separate/marital property, how we traditionally are here in Tennessee.
Okay, so divorce could be one, although I think for most divorces I've seen here at our office, most of them end up being 50-50 if they've been together for a long time. There can be some extenuating circumstances that you may want to avoid that Tennessee Community Property Trust for. And then, so how do we know, again, if the Community Property Trust is right for you? And then I'll expand on that a little bit and go, how does somebody go about getting information about a community property trust, just so they know, is it, based on their situation, should they even consider this? And for costs, like how do people pay for one of these? Who do they go see? Those types of things.
Yeah, so community property trust is essentially something that would benefit individuals who have assets that are jointly owned, that have highly appreciated through the years, and they think would likely get sold off when the first spouse dies. And so it's a very kind of specific group of people, but for those people, it can be a huge benefit. Now, as far as who sets it up and costs associated with it, you want to go to an estate planning firm to do that. Of course, here at Knight Legal and through the Beacon offices, we create these types of trusts. But you want to go to an estate planning firm, make sure it's done properly. Now, one thing about a community property trust, a lot of times when we're tax planning with trust, to get benefits, you have to plan with what are called irrevocable trust, which is a trust when you put something in it, you've kind of given it away. You can still get benefit, but it's not yours anymore, and that's how you get the tax benefits. A community property trust in Tennessee is a plain revocable living trust, same as you'd use as a will alternative. So it's fully amendable during your life. You can change it as much as you want through the years, put assets in, pull it out. It's just anything that's in it is treated as community property. So there's a lot of flexibility in them, but you would want them drafted by an experienced estate planning attorney.
Yeah, so to kind of break it down, if you have jointly owned property that's appreciated in value and there's the potential that one person will die before the other, which is, I think, a pretty good potential in most scenarios, then you could be the individual that could benefit from a conversation around these community property trusts. If you have questions about that, feel free to call our office. If you're willing to spend the time to do it, we'll give you that time at no cost to you to be able to unpack those questions for you to see, is a community property trust something that could be beneficial for you and your family? You can call us at 615-488-3039.